So you're in Indiana?
Yeah, northern Indiana, not far from Chicago, actually.
Okay. Are you always lived there?
Yes. Well, I mean, there was like 20 minutes where I lived in central Illinois, but it's all the same.
Yeah, yeah. I've never lived out there, but I've driven through it several times, but never lived in the American Midwest. I've lived in the
Right.
South. I live in Vegas now, so I live in the Southwest. I've lived in
Yeah.
Louisiana, and I'm from the Mid-Atlantic area, Baltimore.
Hmm.
uh, but never there. And it's always like I don't know. I have a few questions about that too. It'd be like the heartland, right? It's always called like the heartland of America
Right.
for some reason. But I
Right.
think there it's a very I like that. I like the romantic idea of like the
Yeah.
Midwest and the heartland, and
Yeah.
I really
Just,
do. So I have questions about. No, please go on.
yes. Yeah, we have the reputation of just being nice, right? We can always tell when somebody comes in, East Coast, no offense, all of a sudden they'll say something, and then we'll kind of look and they're like, oh, they're from the East Coast. They don't know that we are just unfailingly polite, even if it's to our own detriment.
Yeah, that and it's different than the South too because everybody always said to like Southern. I remember when I first moved to the South and I lived in like Lake Charles, Louisiana, like the heart of Cajun country, like you know 20 minutes from the Texas border, another 30 minutes to the Gulf, and it was like everyone was like, "Oh, Southern people are so nice," and I go in there and it's they are nice. They're not like rude to you, but
Right.
there is like you're not from here. Like I kind of they can just know that like you're an outsider, and they kind of give you
Yeah.
that like stink eye
Yeah.
in the grocery store or whatever. Whereas where I'm from, it's always like kind of like it's not like a genuine niceness, but it's like a polite niceness where like if you're passing each other in a grocery aisle, you do the little kind of silent,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
smile or something, and you just keep moving. You don't have to say anything. But then like I would do that when I moved down to the South, and like I'd pass in a grocery aisle with somebody, and they would just like look away from me very like I'm like, oh my god, I'm like, what did I do? But it's strange how that works. Yeah,
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
yeah. I love that. It's good for fiction. Good for fiction too.
That's right. That's right.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you are listening to Heavy Bored. And we're recording this on May 1st, 2025. My guest today is the author Meg Hamand. Meg is a former columnist and journalist at various outlets, online and off. She holds degrees from Indiana State University and Indiana Wesleyan University. She's been published and awarded for her short stories mostly, but Meg has just published her debut novel, Diamonds in Auschwitz, out from River Grove Books just this past March, about a young Jewish girl who finds a diamond ring in the mud at the gates of Auschwitz during World War II. A diamond engagement ring. Publishers Weekly has called the book a novel of clear-eyed resilience. And Meg writes and operates a blog on her website detailing her story of publication, parenting, family life, navigating being a writer in today's world, and much more. She married her high school sweetheart, and together they live the American dream in northern Indiana. And it's a pleasure to welcome Meg Hamand onto Heavy Board today. Meg, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. We like to start this off with the same question we ask all writers, which is, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did these early years start to form Meg Hamand?
Yeah, grew up in northern Indiana, just like 20 minutes from where I live now, in a very, very small farming community. Actually, the town's name is Hamlet, so that tells you how small it is. So I've got two older siblings and great parents who, went to all of our activities, were really involved in everything that we did. I love to say that, I really came from a family of strong women. So my great grandmother went to college, was a teacher, which, thinking of that generation, quite unusual. My grandmother went to school, has multiple degrees. My mom's school has master's plus 10 as a teacher. So really inspired by strong female women in the family, and have always been really supportive of anything that we did. So I think growing up, I wanted to do a little bit of everything. I played the sports. I did the theater. I was, of course, really passionate about writing. So did a lot of, at the time, journalism. So high school newspaper. I worked for the local newspaper as a sports writer. I think I wrote my first quote book when I was like 10. And it just always felt really, really supported in that. So when I went to school, when I went to college in Indiana State University in Terre Haute, went to school for journalism, and really quickly had met with an English teacher. I mean, I were like a couple weeks into school, and she said, you should not be a journalism major. You need to be an English major. You want to be a writer, clearly, like you just need to commit, and that's what you should do. So I switched almost immediately to English with creative writing and journalism minors. And, so that was my undergrad experience, creative writing and newspaper. I worked for the university's, public publicity team, working, doing press releases. And at the time, I remember doing like a very short vlog, which was so new. I won't say how old or what, how long ago that was, but it was very, very new. And they paid me with the original iPod, right? With the spinny dial. Yeah, that was so, because I was a college student and I didn't have a lot to say. So they're like, you do this vlog for us for like a couple months and we'll give you an iPod. I'm like, yes. So just really finding all these different ways to try and be creative when I was growing up. Now, get out of college though, and was working as a writer for a magazine. And for many reasons, it was an awful job. I mean, really, really terrible job. I was the only journalist for a 250-page haunted house magazine. Haunted house, like animatronics and masks and costumes. And you'll say, well, how did you get into that? What do you know about haunted houses? Not a darn thing, nothing. I just got stuck doing this. And it was such a terrible job that I was willing to do anything to get out of it. And I went into finance, right? Because if you don't know what to do, you should be in banking. So that's what I did. And that's what I've been doing for 17 years. And I think I finally just got a place in my life where I had the energy outside of work and regular family life that I could devote to, being creative again. And that's how I finally worked my way back into, I want to be a writer. And that's where I want to spend my energy.
Absolutely. Are you a millennial? I believe. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I like millennials. I mean, I'm a millennial, so we always get a bad rap. So I like to clarify for everyone that we are the current generation doing things right now.
Nice.
Like we are of age, and everybody confuses us with the younger generations. It's like, no, we're in our 40s, most of us, late 30s.
We're not the young kids anymore, slacking off.
You said you were the youngest of three. You have two older siblings?
Brother. Yeah, older brother and older sister.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's interesting too. And then you had idyllic childhood in the Midwest growing up.
Yeah.
That's one thing, like one common theme. Of course there are people we've had on and maybe go, whatever, divorce rate's 50% or whatever and stuff like that. And so everybody obsesses over that. I'm like, but you never hear about the 50% that's like, well, everybody's parents stayed together and you were raised in this kind of idyllic kind of millennial 90s, early 2000s childhood. It is kind of crazy. Like the number of like, I don't know, maybe it's just the reputation or something. Writers always, oh, my parents were alcoholics and my dad never hugged me. So that's why I became a writer. But it's like our generation's quite different. I know actually most of us had great childhoods, especially our generation. It was, Disney Channel on. We were Disney Channel kids. Very safe neighborhoods. Like the crime wave of the 70s and 80s was over. I don't know. That's fantastic. And you said your mother was a teacher?
Yeah, my mom taught elementary in our school system. My grandmother taught high school, and my grandpa drove bus. So us kids were getting away with nothing. We got
Right.
away with nothing. Not that we really tried a whole lot, right? Like I was a pretty good kid, but there was no chance.
Yeah. What did your father do?
He worked in a factory, drive fork truck, like working hard for the family, made sure he made it to all of our sporting events. I remember one time he worked a really late shift, drove 2 hours for a swim meet that I was in. It was a special like relay meet. I literally literally swam one length of the pool.
Right.
So he drove 4 hours round trip for me to swim like 12 seconds.
Yeah, 50 meters or whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was 25. It wasn't even
25, right? Yeah, that's
it
the
was a little
Olympic.
pool.
Yeah.
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 And I just remember like sitting there going, I feel so bad. But that was the life that I had with my family. Is my dad was not missing events and my mom did not miss anything. And yeah.
Yeah. That's why I like to capture that type of story too, because I think it's one that nobody talks about. Probably because it's easier to talk about the negatives than it is about like the positives and stuff that everyone will talk about. Like, oh, I had a bad childhood, or I came up in some terrible neighborhood. It's like, well, a lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't actually. Actually, a majority of the country didn't.
Yeah. When you're so well taken care of like that, I think it gives you that freedom to be creative, like
Yes.
the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like all of my needs were met. So I had that freedom to say I wanted to be a writer, poet, or newspaper, all these starving artist type things. My sister actually has an English degree as well. And so I sit there looking like what was going on with these girls, these sisters that both just, wanted to live their lives in books, basically.
Right. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And going off of that, I mean, we always like to ask, when did reading and writing come into your life? And you said it was quite early.
Yeah. I don't remember not loving books.
Right. Yeah.
I did a book event not too long ago, and people were asking about, when I used to read a lot of classics, and I still read a lot of classics. And my mom kind of interjected, and she's like, she wouldn't read anything else. So, okay, millennials here. Do you remember Wishbone?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And he did like the remake of classics. He had a book series. He, like the dog, had
and
a
he
book
even
series.
did a Sherlock Holmes series, right? Where,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
like Sherlock Holmes, and they read the old Sherlock stories. And
Gosh, I loved Wishbone. And so even from whatever that would have been like third, fourth, fifth grade, I would only read Wishbone classics and then quickly upgrade it to just like the real unabridged classic. So that was pretty early. And I very clearly remember in fifth grade, I wrote this god awful poem. I mean, it was so stupid, really bad, but my fifth grade teacher had faith in me and entered it into like, those poetry anthologies, which I did. One was like a pay to play. This one was a little bit more selective. And so I really felt pretty good about myself. And I think that was the first time like seeing my name in print and seeing like something that I had created out there for all the 7 people that I knew who bought the book. And so that's what got me started. And after that, I was like, I'm going to be a writer, whether that's newspaper, whether that's fiction, nonfiction, that's what I want to do.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Going off of that too, like we like to ask, what were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or who are your go-to inspirations or idols in the literary world?
From the beginning, I always loved John Steinbeck. I love East of Eden. It's a favorite book of mine. It's kind of got everything. But even like his memoir, I think it's Travels with Charlie or Life with Charlie, with his dog, his French poodle. That's a fantastic book. He's just got so much character in how he writes. So I love John Steinbeck. One of my go-to books still is Gone with the Wind. So, living in the South, you'll kind of understand that. I just love how there's a lot of mystery in my mind about just the making of Gone with the Wind, both the book and the movie.
Oh, yes.
Just really fascinated by these people that created such masterpieces. Margaret Mitchell and Vivian Leigh, and then didn't ever wanted to talk about it. Like just wanted to like, yeah, I did that. Let's move on to the next thing. And then they didn't really do anything next.
Right.
So I love Gone with the Wind, but like the characters are so complex and, fundamentally unlikable, but yet you love them and you're cheering for them. So that's a big one. Nowadays, I read a lot of Eric Larson.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
love
I
Eric
have one of his up
Larson.
on the shelf. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, he's everything he writes is great.
Devil in the
Uh,
White Cities, probably
Devil in the
the
White
most
City.
popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really liked Isaac Storm, which is one of his first ones. That's really great. I love I love the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, if you've ever, and I'm not really a sci-fi person, but that's just so wonderfully written and constantly has me guessing, even though I've read the whole series probably 2 or 3 different times. And then, of course, I love historical fiction, which is what Diamonds and Auschwitz, my book, is. So any type of historical fiction, older, newer, you name it, I'm probably reading it. I love to read about like really unknown people or events in history. So, of course, I read a lot of Holocaust fiction, but I don't want to just read about the big story anymore. Like, I really want to get like detail, like micro stories of like this really specific person that no one's ever heard of, and like dig into what they did, because there's still so many untold stories in history of real people that even when you fictionalize it, we learn so much about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to get to with you about I personally, I try to bring back this sense of romanticism. And I think there's too much cynicism in the world at large, but also in literature right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of tired of the Gen X cynicism, irony, nihilism. Like it's just that we've seen all that before. Like, I'm like, I've been trying. I love the romantic sense of the small details, the little ring you find in the mud. Like your whole novel. Like, I think that is so important, and I want to get to you about that too. And it's a theme on this podcast. Just I like to romanticize. I think artists, writers, that's the beauty of it. You romanticize these tiny little everyday things around you, and actually, it's great. It's beautiful. All of that stuff. But yeah, I love that. So you said Steinbeck. I mean, that's a great one for a young kid. I mean, he's actually very accessible for young, like teenagers, preteens, like very accessible.
Easily read, right? Yeah, like the story is, beautiful writing, but very straightforward. It's not like a Faulkner where you're trying to understand, like, I am a fish, like I don't know what that means.
Yes.
And
My mother's
honestly,
a
like
fish. Yes, part of
right.
It. Yeah.
East of Eden has so many like really cool things, right? It's got like love affairs and cheating and lying and killing, and I don't know, it just has like really all those big elements that you want of a story. And then it's retelling a Bible story, which talk about go back to the classics, right?
Yeah absolutely.
So that's a great one.
Gone with the Wind. Okay.
No.
So you mentioned this, one of the biggest novels, one of the biggest stories ever written. It is iconic, it is immortalized, it is romanticized, it is the antebellum South, post Civil War Reconstruction. Well, really, I guess it takes you through the entire process,
right?
And that's a huge novel. That's a huge novel. How old were you when you first picked that up, if you can remember? We don't need exact.
I'm gonna say high school, end of high school.
Yeah. And it's one of those books that you're like intimidated by because it's so huge,
it
like
is
1,200 pages, and then but you fly through it. Like you can fly through that novel.
Again, like it's an easy read, right? Like she has beautiful details. She does such a great job of bringing to life, the plantation, and then Atlanta as it's growing. But really, it reads pretty easily. So, and again, you've got war, and you've got Reconstruction, and you have the KKK, and you have love, and you have love triangles, and
segregation. You
got
have
everything. Yeah.
And then part of that book, you still have the slave dynamic. Very huge, because it encapsulates this history. And I want to talk to you about wars and kind of historical backdrops. And that's a theme on the podcast too. I love stories like that. But I think that's a good one. It's a fun one to pick too. And I'm that's one of those stories. The book itself and the movie itself here, it came under fire recently for certain themes, and I just think it's one of those ones that needs to be defended on the artistic merits whenever I get a chance. It needs to be defended.
I know. Sometimes I hesitate to say that I love Gone with the Wind, because I feel like it's maybe is not aging well, and I definitely understand the criticism that it comes under.
Right.
But for me, it's the character development. Like if you've read it, Scarlett is very unlikable, and I can't stand Ashley. And really, Rhett Butler is quite questionable as a moral character, but yet I love them all and I want nothing but good things for Scarlett, even though she's kind of terrible.
Well,
So for me to be able to write such true characters that that your mind tells you should not like, but your heart loves, like that's the epitome of being like a writer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think stuff like that too, like, what's the rule of drama? I think it was a playwright who said this, where he was just said, nobody wants to watch someone almost do something bad. Like nobody wants to watch that or see that. They want to see the character do something bad or betray somebody. That's the drama.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
drama. So like you can't
Things
have
are
these,
boring.
oh, they're unlikable. It's like, okay, yeah, like it's supposed to be like a tension. It's supposed to create tension between the characters. It's like, that's, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's a fantastic American novel. We should hold it up. Going off of that too, Scholastic Book Fairs always come up on this too, because that's such a millennial thing, but it's also, I wanted to ask you about Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is mentioned in your bio on your website. You said you named your dog after Mr. Darcy.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask, is it just Pride and Prejudice or all of Jane Austen? And, and I know I have long questions here, I apologize. And it says, and what is it about Jane Austen that draws you in?
Okay, so Pride and Prejudice, definitely. I don't love Emma. I mean, I've read all of Jane Austen. I really like Persuasion, which is probably her like most undervalued story. But Pride and Prejudice, yes, it's still so relevant.
It's her best book. Yeah, it's
oh
her
my
best
gosh,
book
it's so
by a
great,
mile.
and it's funny. I think that people don't realize, like, laugh out loud. Jane Austen is laugh out loud funny, and she understands. I mean, she was so progressive, right? Like she really wanted more for her female characters. Yes, she wanted them to marry well because that was the idea of success. But you're talking about a woman who never got married, who was successful without that. So I think she was writing to her time period, but like still really progressive. And I mean, just wonderful characters. I mean, who doesn't want to be friends with Elizabeth Bennet, who is brilliant and smart and cutting and, talented. So I just, that's like a feel good novel for me. And my husband can always tell if I'm going through like a particularly stressful patch of life. Cause like I'll pull out, sometimes Gone with the Wind, though Gone with the Wind is not necessarily like a feel goody kind of book, but like Pride and Prejudice for sure. And he'll be like, okay, she's reading Pride and Prejudice again. Like, let me think what's going on in our lives that has brought her back to that book. But it's like, it's comfort food.
Yeah.
And now I know the characters so well that I feel like I'm going home, like for a high school reunion and spending time with these people that I haven't met with for a long time.
That and being millennials, that Keira Knightley version that came out.
Almost word for word.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's dialogue pulled
good.
directly from the book. Yes.
And it was a great remake. It was a great version. And it came out like right at like time when I was kind of a teenager. I'm 35, so I was like a little bit on the younger side of millennials, but it's still like I don't know. It was just so iconic. It's still played on TV all the time. When people are referencing or sharing screenshots online or something, they're usually doing that particular version of Pride and Prejudice with what's his face, Matthew McFadden played Mr. Darcy or whatever. Everybody knows him now as whatever, the guy from Succession, right? Tom from Succession. His Emmys, but like that was his.
He'll
like
always be Mr. Darcy to me.
And that too, like I mean, and I think Jane Austen she is. I guess people would say it's a more female coded. Like obviously, it's kind of her formula. And I don't mean to call it a formula either. I mean these are great original literary novels, but like is kind of the basis for the modern romance genre. Like her relationship drama, the kind of. And I mean, I love Edith Wharton. She's one of my favorite writers and stuff, and she was in this vein too, I think. And I want to get to you about, love stories and stuff too, because that's a huge part of your novel. And I just think fiction in general and humanity. I mean, this, I don't know, because I feel like whenever we're talking about story, we're talking about fiction, we're talking about iconic things that we love or inspire us. I feel like we're talking about, fiction and art making and all that too, but we're also talking about humanity itself, like we're talking about these huge feelings that everybody feels. Which was part of the reason we're so drawn to fiction. But I love the Jane Austen stuff because, I just had my first kid, my daughter, about 8 months ago, and my wife is already like very into like, oh, I can't wait to show her these kind of Pride and Prejudice, and I'm an Edith Wharton fan, so I'm like, yeah, she's definitely be reading Edith Wharton as soon as she's old enough. All
It's a
that.
Vanity Fair going right from the beginning.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that's, yeah, it hits something in us, you know. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I want to ask you this. Let's just ask it now. We bounce around sometimes on this podcast. It's no problem. Love stories. You know, what is it about love stories? You know, why are we drawn to them? Why are you drawn to them? You know, why are they always so popular? Why are they so timeless? And we don't need to. This is not a podcast where we need. I know that's a huge question. So this is not a podcast where we need definitive answers. But just, you know, your thoughts on this. What draws you to them, or why you think we are drawn to love stories and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is going to sound, I don't know, maybe anti-feminist, but like we all look at, like, we want love, right? You want love. And I'm so blessed to have, you know, married my high school sweetheart, right? Like when you talk about it, my life sounds so picture perfect, which I'm sure it is, right? And so even though I want to read and I want to read other people find their love story, and, you know, I'm a rom-com fan, obviously more so with movies. I don't read as many like just rom-com romantic books, though. When I am feeling stressful, or I've just come off of a really heavy book, or I just wrote a heavy book, Diamonds in Auschwitz, right?
Yeah.
I need to spend a little time with a little, you know, in that area, in that genre. So I just finished a Lucy Score and an Emily Henry book right back to back, which I wouldn't usually do. I like to kind of space out my genres, but it just was like, that was the mood, and that was what was calling me. And I love the banter between, you know, in romantic books, the banter between the characters. And when you read it, their problems seem so easily fixed, right? I just finished, what did I read with Emily Henry? It wasn't her new one. It was Funny Story. And they feel like, and she really hits on some true issues that people struggle with. And I loved that. Like, it was very vulnerable, but read in like kind of a funny, like standoffish way. Like, I can laugh about this woman's pain. But also, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking like, this is such an easy problem to fix. Like, why are we making this so difficult? And then I think it just puts all of our issues into perspective as well, right? Like, there's some pretty heavy books that you're just like, I don't see how the characters are ever going to come out of this. And then you read some of these rom-com books and you're like, I enjoy watching them struggle, because all they have to do is like say these 3 words and it's all fine.
Yeah, and rom-com itself, too, I feel like is kind of like a genre that's been forgotten in the last 10, 15 years. Even movies that you mentioned, like, so I remember growing up, like, yeah, as a teenager, there was a hit romantic comedy probably it felt like every other weekend or like every month or something. There was just a hit, you know, Matthew McConaughey or somebody before he did his little switch to, you know, serious acting roles or whatever. He was like the cute hunk guy or whatever with his shirt off with Sarah Jessica Parker or whatever, you know, like
He
something.
has the best movies.
Yeah, like there was just the romantic, and I think that this is where I mentioned the cynicism stuff, where I think this kind of turn away from the kind of funny, lighthearted, usually classic. I mean, there are some really classic romantic comedies that you can point to. I feel like it's just this cynicism that's infected with people, like, oh, that's not real, or, oh, you know, meet cutes or whatever, or cliche or
Neither
something.
is Star Wars.
Right, exactly.
Sorry for the Star Wars lovers, but I'm like, come on.
Neither is
None
Star
of it's
Wars.
real.
Neither is, yeah, whatever. Like, it's a story. It's but it fills you up with that feeling that you get out of it. I'm trying to think of like the best.
Peyton Leopold's not real? You mean Hugh Jackman is not traveling back in time? Crap.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's like this. It's like maybe it's this obsession with authenticity too, or something, where they say, "Oh, that's not authentic," or something. I don't know, but I feel like it is a forgotten kind of genre. Yeah. But the reason I'm interested and I want to ask you about love stories is because I am fascinated by these kind of, you know, the timeless love stories. The kind of, you know, you can see them in Greek mythology, you can see them in the Bible stories, you can see them in all of historical fiction. Like, you can see them in throughout history, these kind of love tales. And maybe it's one that's universal, everybody feels it for the most part, so maybe that's why it resonates with us. But I was just like, yeah, there's just something about, you know, I'm gonna keep bringing up Edith Wharton because she's one of my favorites, but like, you know, when I'm thinking like Age of Innocence or something, like that love story where it's almost like a tragedy at the end, where her stories almost don't have happy endings, you know, like none of her stories have happy endings, but there's still these great dramatized love stories for them. That's like the bulk of the drama, you know, and then gossip in between and stuff. But like, I think like the Age of Innocence, like, why is that ending so heart-wrenching? It's because like it's like, I don't know, like it's right there, like you could do it and you're too afraid to do it, and I don't know,
Yeah.
it just, that love that just set up, it just takes so much skill to set that up and make you feel that as a writer. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, yeah, please go on.
I think there's a lot of pressure to create this like amazing love story. So honestly, there's a love story portion, part of my book, but I guess that wasn't for me. Like I wouldn't sell this as a romantic book in any way. Partly
Right.
because I don't think that there's enough time with those characters to really like appreciate the love. And it doesn't always have to be huge grand gestures, right? Like we all want Heath Ledger to sing to us at the football stadium, right? Up and down the
Another millennial
bleachers.
reference. 10 things
Exactly,
I hate about you.
obviously.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
But there's so much to be said for just like this quiet, consistent love. And I think really, when I was writing Hannah and Samuel, that's what I was looking more for. Like they were just each other's safe place. And a lot of their most, impactful conversations were not conversations at all. It was just time together, being comfortable in the quiet, being comfortable just, touching one another, having some sort of physical connection. But partly because it's very intimidating to me to try and live up to, a Scarlett and a Rhett from Gone with the Wind. How do I
Right.
write that?
Yeah.
That's a tall order.
That, or yeah, I mean, you mentioned 10 things I hate about you, right? I mean, that's Shakespeare. It's modern
Yeah.
interpretation of Taming of the Shrew, and then
Yeah.
we have, I mean, I think it is a challenge, yeah, because you have all this pressure, then you have all this history too, whereas all these great novels that did it, and you have to kind of, if you're going to do that, you're like, all right, now I have to compete with these
Yeah.
Jane Austen level, like,
Yeah.
romance. It's like, that's quite an ask for a writer.
Yeah. And if you're trying to get the reader to buy in that like everything is happening because the love of these two characters is so strong, again, that's a lot of pressure to prove to the readers
Right.
that the love of these two characters is that strong. And you have to do that. Like you only have so much time in the book to like establish that love before you try to break it up. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult without, I think, coming off as corny or trite to
Right.
do that. So boy, I have nothing but respect for writers who can pull off like a true powerful love story.
Like Nicholas Sparks or somebody that's like, I mean, I was thinking The Notebook, again, another millennial reference, right?
Yeah.
That kind of,
Yeah.
Where, that's interesting too. I didn't plan on asking you about this, but I was thinking, somebody like Jonathan Franzen, who he has this great, if you read any of his stuff, I mean, it doesn't matter if you have, but like, yeah, like he always has kind of a family dynamic in his novels. And he always argues, people are like, oh, did you have like a messed up family life or something? And he always says, no, like people are confusing, technique with like confessional, personal stuff. He's
Right.
like, technique wise, where he said like, if you have a brother and a sister or a son and a father or whatever, that automatically sets up a dynamic, like a relationship that you can work within as a writer, like,
Mhm.
or a full family of 5 or whatever it is, like that he has his various novels, usually always centered around a family in some relationship. Cause he's like, it's technique. And that's interesting too. Like kind of, yeah, like the family or a love story dynamic sets up an implication, that you can work within in fiction and stuff like that. So that's always interesting how that works out. But yeah, that's I mean, yeah, that's great. That's great. I wanted to ask you about, I know this isn't a romance novel, but I wanted to ask, yeah, because with the love story thing, and I was thinking love story in the mind, kind of, romance is one of the genres that is, it's in, just generally speaking, it's one of the few things that's actually still selling pretty well, like in publishing.
Yeah.
Like all the other genres, especially literary fiction and some of these others, adventure fiction is kind of going down in sales. And I was just thinking, I was like, maybe this is a good question to ask you, because again, just because I was thinking on the love story angle, why is something like the romance formula or the romance genre so popular? What do you think readers get from it? And as I mentioned already, I think somebody like Jane Austen or something is almost like the formula for like the modern romance. Obviously, it's much different now, but like it's still like you set up these characters, the back and forth, the meet cutes. I don't know. I mean, your thoughts on this? Why do you think the romance genre is one of the ones? It's like romance and sci-fi are like the two that
Yeah.
are just staying. The sales are going up instead of down, and every other genre is
Yeah.
going down. Yeah, I don't know. What are your
I
thoughts?
think it's just relevant to everybody, right?
Right,
Going back to
right.
that, like everybody really wants to find love in their life, and in whatever way that might be. Maybe it's not necessarily romantic love, but you want that connection. Going back to like the family ties. We want love in our family, love with children, best friends, whatever. We want that. So, you'll have people say, well, I'm not really into sci-fi. I'm not really into paranormal or fantasy. Like, don't give anything to me with dragons. I've been surprised that, people that I know that are big readers and will say, like, I don't read historical fiction. Like, it's just something that is not interested in. They're not interested in that. But they all still want to find connection. And that's what a love story is. So it kind of cuts out the specific interests, right? Cuts out the space, cuts out the history, cuts out the dragons and the fairies, unless that's your thing, whatever, right? That's the thing too. You can read that. And it just gets really right down to that straight human emotion.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, how it kind of gives everybody that thing they're looking for. At least, yeah, and we talk about this all the time on the podcast, kind of formulas and stuff like that. Like when you're picking up a Danielle Steele, you're picking up a Stephen King. So you know what you're getting. There's like an expectation created by like a writer's style and like big name after a while, and you comfort in that kind of formula, I think. Or knowing that you're going to get this kind of romance drama. I guess I'm saying stuff. These writers are all old now. Danielle Steele and Stephen King. I guess what is it? The TikTok woman that's doing that now. All those romance books. I can't think of her name, but everybody knows who I'm talking about. That Mormon woman that is writing all those romance novels and is blowing up. I can't think of her.
I can't help you.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows who I'm talking. God, yeah. Colleen Hoover. That's yes. Colleen Hoover.
I knew she was Mormon. Yeah.
For some reason. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to me how that works with these genres. And moving on to that too, I wanted to ask you about storytelling in general. And you mentioned already kind of being drawn to stories and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about storytelling for you? What drives you toward it, or rather, pulls you toward it?
Yeah, I really like to. I like to write what I wish I could read, right? And that's I did not come up with that. I'm not that original, right? But so we'll go into Diamonds in Auschwitz for a second.
Yeah, please.
I was inspired to write this because I was reading Wendy Holden's Born Survivors, which is a nonfiction book about women who were pregnant when they were sent to Auschwitz, and it's their story of giving birth and trying to nurse a baby in these awful conditions.
Right.
But tiny little parts, she said, like one of these women had held on to her family's engagement ring through the Nazi occupation, through the ghetto. They just got to Auschwitz, and she was like, I am not letting the Nazis have this ring. I don't care what happens to it. They're not getting it. Right. So she drops it as she's like going through the selection line. And that was it. That's all they talk about. I think really quickly they mentioned she looked for it in the ground when she came back 50 years later and didn't find it. Shocking. And I was like, but who did find it, right? Like somebody picked that ring up. What did that do for them? And so that's where Diamonds in Auschwitz came from, is I had all these questions about this ring that's, now in my mind, it's in the mud, and what that could do. And I didn't get enough of the story of how the woman held on to the ring. Like it's just this little tiny thing of resistance that she did, but how did that fulfill her life and give her purpose? Like, I'm keeping something from the Nazis. They've taken everything from me, but I still have this ring. And so I just had a lot of questions of like what that was like. And so that's how I wrote the book. And so for me, that's how I have all of the novels ideas. I've just finished my first draft of my second book, got a couple other things started. I got a notebook full of ideas. And it's always like, you mentioned one little character in this book that was true, and I need more information. You just mentioned them. I need a whole book. Or tell me more. How did this happen? Where did this come from? And so that's where I'm trying to dig into. I need more.
Yeah. And that's where I get into Romanticism, where I think that is so good. Like we had another writer on here that talked about, picking up like a bullet from a Civil War battlefield and then kind of romanticizing a story from it, or something as simple as like a coin, a diamond ring. Like you pick up this coin, and I know this is silly, and you're not going to do this in your everyday life, listeners, and all that. But like as a writer, you just a quarter that you get in your change, like, and it's like, oh, it's from 1981 or something.
Yeah.
how many pockets has this quarter been in? Like, what has it been through? How many vending machines? You know, like, just kind of like, how many banks has it gone through? Like, you can start romanticizing a story and all the little hands that touched it, you know, throughout 40, 50 years, hundreds of years, if you want to do something like, you know, fantasy novel or something like that's always interesting. That's where like the best fantasy stuff has these kind of historical lead jumping off points, even if they're fictionalizing what the outcome, you know, I'm thinking like Indiana Jones, you know, like the Last Crusade, the Ark of the Covenant, these kind of legendary historical things, but also they fictionalize the story around it. It's just such a rich, it enhances everything. So I just love that idea of romanticizing something as small as like a diamond ring found in the mud. And like obviously it's more specific than that because it's in the mud at the gates of Auschwitz. That's very different than just finding it in like a field or something or like a street or a gutter. But I love that, and I love that was your entire starting point for this the inspiration for this novel is. Yeah, I just feel like there's not enough of it. There's this tendency that like think that that's corny or cheesy or something like that or too sentimental. That's what I mean. I'm like I'm straight up. I'm declaring war on cynicism, Meg. I'm as little as I can, my little impact that I have. I am trying to end this cynicism and irony obsession that Gen X gave us, and we're trying to get into a new creative place. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, you're part of that. I love that. I love that idea too.
You know, it's funny because when I wrote so I had the end of Diamonds in Auschwitz, the ending changed from what I originally wrote to what readers are seeing, and what was printed with the final product was what I had always wanted. And I thought I was falling into this trap. So I was working with Ava, my developmental editor, who was amazing. And so we finished the book. We're kind of wrapping things up. And I said, hey, here is kind of what I wanted the original ending to be. But I was really afraid that it was going to tie everything up in too pretty of a bow. And I was going to be, you know, accused of like, oh yeah, like it's, you know, you're so naive that you think this is how it's going to end. And she's like, this is a World War II fiction, takes place in Auschwitz mainly. Like you can't tie it up in a bow nicely anymore. Like too many characters have bad endings. Do with what you want. And I'm so glad that I went with, we're going to say again in quotes, the happy ending, right? Because,
yeah, as happy as it can be.
Not everybody is killed off at the end. So I'll give that out. And I think there's a really nice connection at the end. And I also just think that it brought everything together because it's dual timeline. And it's so nice when you can put the connections, and they're pretty subtle throughout the book of how the timelines are intersecting and they're connecting with each other. But I am really glad that I went with the quote unquote happier ending,
right? Even
though maybe I'm just romanticizing things, but we got to give people something.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I'm a big film fan. I know most people are. I mean, it's film. Everybody loves movies, but there's, you know, a lot of people are saying like in the 70s into the 80s there was this kind of nihilism, like the really sad endings. You know, it was always kind of sad, dramatic endings, and then you saw kind of the 80s and 90s kind of shifted to happy endings. Even like something, I don't know, pulling something out of my Good Will Hunting or something. It has kind of a happy ending after all the drama, kind of. I don't know. And then we kind of went back to these, I don't know, sad endings or something, or cynical endings. And yeah, this gets to the next question here because I wanted to ask you about the theme of hope. You know, I wanted to ask you about hope. It's a theme in the novel, but it's a theme on this podcast too. You know, and I wanted to ask you like, why is hope so important? To you personally, or you know, to your fiction writing, and why is it good for fiction writing? And again, I know that's a huge philosophical question, so please, just your thoughts. We don't need to figure it out for everybody listening just now. It's just yeah.
I think hope is a really fun's probably not the right word, but a really interesting theme to have in your book, because they're the people like, this is what keeps me alive, right? This little nugget of hope. And so of course the ring is the physical representation of hope and its beauty, and it's so wonderful and it's perfect and it stays perfect and beautiful no matter what's going on. So right, that's hope, and it's what keeps people alive. And that really is the theme of the book. It's about resiliency and just finding even the tiniest little reasons. But I also love the other school of thought of like the truly cynical, and hope is what kills them, right? And so Ben Folds has this great song, and he says hope is a bastard, and he goes on and on about how like hope is really what's going to kill these people because there is no hope in the situation. And I really liked using both of those ideas in the book, because the first character that we meet, one of the main characters, Rachel, is she basically says, like, hope will kill you. That is what's going to kill me in Auschwitz, is thinking that there's a way out of this. But then she holds on to this ring when she knows she shouldn't. So her mind is telling her, don't hope, but her body and her heart is like holding, like literally holding on to hope. And I just really loved the juxtaposition of that, or the contradictions of that. And it just shows to how complex humans can be. Even the same person can have really differing views of hope. So I kind of liked playing around with that idea through different sets of characters.
Yeah, and I think it's a romantic, and I mean it, of course, romantic in terms of romanticizing something like this. Like, I think hope itself, like, I'm thinking of, okay, we think of the big Holocaust, I'm thinking of Elie Wiesel and stuff like Nights, like this, and that's somebody like Elie Wiesel who lived through it. Like, how do you survive something like that without, even if it's fictionalized in your own head, like there's no reason for you to have hope. How the hell do you wait? Like, how do you get through that without having just a sliver of this little emotion that we can create in ourselves of hope? You don't, if you don't have hope, you do just end up not getting through it, or letting yourself succumb to the tragedy of it, or the horrors of it and all that. So yeah, I'm just fascinated by that and kind of hopefulness. I don't know. I mean, I feel maybe, and I wonder maybe part of the reason that everybody's so cynical now is a lack of hope. And of course I'm generalizing by that. Not everybody is so cynical, but I mean, just the lack of having something to hope for, and whether that be a love interest or something like that, or whether that be a career, or whether that be a job you really want, or we can make it as small or as big, as the high stakes as your novel, right, where you can go that far, or you can go so small, just a little bit of hope that you're going to make it through today or something, if you're having a really bad day. I don't know. I mean, it's these little things that, like you said, and it's contradictory too. You could be in the worst situation of your life, and actually it's irrational to have hope, right? Like, if you're being a completely rational person and you're in an awful situation, like an internment camp in Nazi Germany, it's I don't know, it's almost irrational to have it, but without it you couldn't get through it. And it is that's why I'm so fascinated by it, maybe. But I love that your novel captures it. Please.
Yeah, and it's such a natural, like, survival technique. So in Auschwitz, we've got Rachel, who is trying to shut down. She says she's living in a mental fog. That's what she wants. She says, we're all dead. Why should I talk to anybody? Why? Because dead people don't talk. And then she meets Haya, which is a 9 or 10-year-old girl who she can't help it. She's hopeful. She's playful. She's curious. She is friendly, and she's got nothing but smiles, and she sees the bright side in everything because, her life has been pretty terrible, without giving a lot away. At one point, she even says, kind of near the end of the book, when things are bad, like, Auschwitz is better than where I was before. And so, why is everybody so, at least here I've got Rachel, I've got people to talk to. And so Haya also is kind of like that embodiment of hope. It's like, you try to stamp it down, you don't, but like, you really can't fight it. It's just so natural for humans to try and find something to hold on to. So I loved writing Haya because she just was so innocent. She was a blank slate. Because even though she's like 9 or 10, she spent her formative years in a cellar kind of by herself. So she like doesn't know anything. So to be able to write an older, not older, but 9 or 10, we're not talking about a toddler, but kind of give her like this blank slate of a toddler's mind, because she just hadn't been experienced with anything. That was a really fun experiment for writing, to do her point of view.
Yeah, children are tough too. Children are tough to write. Obviously we're all children and we can think back to, but it's always, hindsight 2020. It's easier when you're looking back, when you're like, oh, when I was a kid, maybe I was thinking this, but it's always, I always say, like, somebody like Stephen King, I think, writes children pretty well. There's some authors that do it really well, and there's some that, like, it's tough to do. It's tough to get into that. Maybe it's easier. I think it is easier once, I just had my first kid, so I'm just comparing it to that. So it's like, once you have a kid, It's a little easier to get into their head, because you're seeing their
Yeah.
reactions to things. You're seeing how they walk. You're seeing all this like how they're thinking, how they're rationalizing things when they talk to you and stuff. And maybe it becomes a little easier when you have a couple of kids and you're around them all the time. But I don't know. That's it's a tough
For
one.
sure. My daughter is 13, so she was like
nice,
9 and 10 when I was writing Haya, and very naturally playful and curious, and like one of those kids where we used to say you have to go, sit on the stairs for timeout because you couldn't send her to her room because her room is too cool.
Yeah.
And she'd sit on the stairs and she'd like be playing with her fingers or like like little bits of the carpeting, and I'm like, you're in trouble. Be miserable. And she would just, she could not make her miserable, which is great. I sound like a terrible parent, but I'm just trying to discipline my child. And so a lot of like Haya being in Auschwitz and finding like, playing with clumps of mud and jumping her fingers through the shades and the sunshine patches, like literally watched my daughter do this when she was supposed to be in trouble. So it was easier to write that because I kind of like look off to the side and see, all right, what's Lucy doing over there? Yeah, that sounds like something Haya would do.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you again about historical fiction. And, your novel covers probably the historical event that looms largest in the world, the Holocaust. And this is another theme on the podcast where we're interested in historical kind of backdrops to novels and fiction, what it does, technique, and I think, broader than technique too. But like, how did you approach it? How do you approach writing historical fiction? And how do you even approach a topic like the Holocaust, or how did you... How did that come to be, and how do you use it when you're trying to do like a historical fiction project like this?
Yeah. I thought I knew a lot about the Holocaust because, again, big reader, fiction and nonfiction. I'm like equal across the board. So I thought I knew a lot about it. I knew I needed to get into some more specifics of where my characters were before they went to Auschwitz. Well, also, I didn't know enough about Auschwitz. I ended up doing way more research, but I'm thinking in my head when I'm starting this out, like, I got this part. I've read enough books. And it gave me a generalization. But then when I wanted things to be very authentic. So, I mean, don't look at my Google search. I can't tell you how many times I was like, okay, I want a map of Auschwitz. I want to know where the barracks were. Were they stone? Were they wood? What did the was it hay? Was it a blanket? Like I wanted to know all the details because I wanted to be really authentic. So that was still like an area that I didn't know anything about. But once I knew what I wanted the story to be, I started looking into like what geographical regions filled into Auschwitz. And so that kind of took me to Prague, and I knew nothing about Prague, but I was like, okay, well, let's see what's there. Well, I already knew my story was going to be about art and beauty and how that could really change a person's life. Well, Prague, I could not have asked. I stumbled upon Prague.
Right.
I could not have asked for a better city to show beauty and architecture and art. And like, Prague is just this amazing city, just aesthetically, just looking at it. And so, okay, I've got an artist, I've got an architecture. Great. Like I'm really hitting this art theme pretty hard in the book. And so then I start researching about Prague, which was so fascinating, and its place in World War II history. The city was basically left alone for the most part. At least, there wasn't bombing. There was no major attacks on it. The Nazis came in, they took over, they were terrible to the Jews, but the city as a whole was really well protected. So that was kind of, again, that difference of like, everybody else seems to be basically living their lives, and then these terrible things are happening to the Jews. So I loved that I kind of ended up in Prague. And then that took me to Terezin, which is the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto outside. It was a fort town right outside of Prague that the Germans ended up turning into the ghetto. And oh my goodness, most people probably would have started with Terezin and had figured out the story. I'm kind of, again, stumbled into it. I lucked into it, started researching Terezin. It was mainly populated with artists and musicians and college professors because it was kind of branded as this like great place for like the most amazing Jewish brains to go, right? Like cultured, and here is a safe haven to ride out the storm, which of course was not.
Right.
But so it brought in all these different Jews from that area of Europe. And one woman who came in, so she's featured in my story, whatever I wrote about her is basically fact, besides, she's got dialogue with my characters. She smuggled in bits of paper instead of bringing in clothing and food and blankets like most selfish, normal people would bring in. So she smuggled in art supplies and bits of paper like receipts and torn wrapping paper.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
And bits of cardboard boxes, knowing that she wanted to teach an art class to the children in Terezin. So 15,000 children went through Terezin during World War II. About 100 survived. And she taught this art class to them as a way to give them an outlet for all the horrific things that they were seeing and experiencing. And then before she was sent off to the gas chamber, she perished in the Holocaust. She smuggled all of the artwork and the poetry that the kids had worked on out, and it's on display all over the world, including the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C.
Right.
There's a little area of that, and it was published into a book that said I never thought I'd see a butterfly, and it's all this artwork, and I was just blown away by this story. Again, art and hope and just finding ways to still have beauty when you're in this terrible situation. And that is what kept these children alive. And so I wanted to include that. So it gets to be like a really big part of the story. And I'm really, clearly, I'm very passionate about it, because if you go to the museum in DC, this woman's not mentioned. And I totally understand there are literally millions of people that we cannot, one museum can never give everybody's story. So I get that, but I'm like, this is something that I can do. This woman needs to be, her story needs to be known. What she did for these children needs to be known. So that was really an amazing part. And that's why I like historical fiction.
Yeah.
To take it even a little bit further, I did a book event in my hometown, and one of my teachers, who's also, friends with my mom, came up to me and told me this story. So I don't mention the name of the book where the artwork is printed that's, available today. She said, "Have you ever heard of this book?" And I said, "Yeah, I bought a copy of it, used it when I'm writing about the book, writing my book." And she said that she actually had met a child, well, he was a grown man, who had been in Terezin. And so she had this book. She was with her daughter. They were, I think, in Texas, and he was, quite older now. And he was like, "Yeah, I was there." So he flips open the page and talks about this kid artwork, this was a friend of his, and he remembers him making this picture, and he signs the book. And I just am getting chills, because I'd never even met anyone else who had ever heard of Terezin, let alone the art class. And here is a woman that I've known almost my entire life who had met one of those kids that was in that art class. And to me, is just this is why history is so important. And even if it's just in the form of historical fiction, there's so much truth behind those words that we don't want to forget about these kids. We don't want to forget about the art teacher. We don't want to forget about the artwork that they created. So that is why I just love historical fiction, because it brings that stuff to life, but makes it more accessible to people who don't want to sit through a 500-page nonfiction novel by Stephen Ambrose, who I also love, but not marketable to everybody, right? So if we can write this really engaging story and filter in these really amazing true stories, I think that's how we get history to stay alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you tied this into beauty being the source of hope, art and beauty being not just the main, like you said, what the book is, if you were to call it what it's about, kind of art and beauty giving you enough hope to survive, or saving you in some way, saving the character in some way. And I think that is something I love in terms of like, again, going back to the bringing back a romantic view of the world, where this kind of beauty for beauty's sake, right? Like, why do we love beauty? Well, we love it because it allows us to be hopeful when we see something like even beautiful architecture or a beautiful painting or even a beautiful person or something like why do we worship celebrity and stuff? Well, because they're usually beautiful, and they're usually it gives us some aspirational kind of thing, like when we see beautiful people or beautiful buildings or beautiful artwork or read a beautiful story, there is this thing that's just ingrained in us, and you can see it through all of history, every culture, every ancient civilization. Like there was this worship of the beautiful night sky or a beautiful queen or something or something like that, like where it just we worship it, and it fills us up with something. Like it fills us up with that oh wow, look at how great that is, maybe it's worth living, or oh wow, look at how beautiful it is, maybe it's worth pursuing this, or that is great. And I think with historical fiction too, there's like, and then going back to that Franzen quote, like it's technique too, right? So you have this historical backdrop, now you have this whole world where you can explore, very rich, right? You can go any direction you want as a fiction creative writing fiction story around this historical backdrop. So that's why I'm so fascinated by we just had a episode where we go into the backdrop was the Vietnam War, and so it's like, okay, when you're in the Vietnam War, you can focus on one soldier trying to do this kind of rescue POWs, or you could do a broad scope, or you could do like the villagers that are being attacked, you could just stay in one village, or it's just so rich, you go so many different directions. And I wonder if people are almost turned off by historical fiction because it can almost go too broadly, especially as a creative. You can almost get so many options that you get paralyzed. You don't know where to go. But I think like you finding something like a Ring and then a few characters to focus on. I mean, then you start cooking, and you're like, all right, here we go. Like, this historical backdrop can be used to my advantage, to the story's advantage, to the characters. Yeah, I love that. With historical fiction. Yeah. I feel like historical fiction is slowly kind of creeping back into like mainstream publishing, Slowly.
I think so.
Yeah, slowly. Maybe it'll take like 10 years, maybe, but like we're just starting to see this kind of, I've seen the kind of recent releases, and I've had authors on recently that have been doing this kind of, and I'm just like, it makes sense that we're kind of shifting back into like a historical fiction's cool. It matters. It's worth reading. It's a lot of fun. You can even learn a few things that are factual, even though it's fiction, right?
As a writer, I think it's like, it was funny. I was talking to another writer friend, and she does thriller, and she's like writing about like bombs and like this. And I was like, I'm a little concerned that all this stuff about bombs. And she's like, I said, it just seems too hard. And she said, are you kidding? Like, you research all this history stuff. Like, that seems way too hard. I'm like, this is easy for me, because in my mind, like, the story is actually kind of written. Like, I didn't rewrite World War II.
Right.
This is not like an Inglourious Bastards thing where I just changed the ending completely. Right. So for me, it's like, half of the story is actually kind of written. I just have to research it. But also, if I get lazy and I don't want to research it anymore, I just make it up, right? I always envisioned myself as like an Eric Larson. When I was in my undergrad, I did a lot of research and a lot of like things on Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, because for me was like the first like creative nonfiction. And I was like obsessed with that book, which sounds weird, but like just the idea, like you said, like the process of it, of how he did, like he created this really engaging, like almost suspenseful book, but it was completely off of interviews. So I really like that idea, but I cannot fathom how much work Eric Larson puts into researching, right? Or like just all these great biographers. I love their stuff and I want to read it, but I don't have that kind of time or patience. So for me, it's like I do like a little bit of the research and then I just make the rest up.
Right. Jumping off point. And then, absolutely. Little diving board to go into the pool.
Yeah.
It's like
little best of both worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned Capote too, In Cold Blood. It's a great book. Probably his most famous. Something about that book just has a grip on teen girls that Like, I remember my sister, I have an older sister, she was obsessed with it when she was assigned it, in high school or something.
Right?
And like, yeah, maybe it's like the loves, like, because that's kind of like when he falls in love
Yeah.
with the guy that he's
Yeah,
like,
and the
I don't
teen
know.
girls in the family, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just a lot, and as from the craft, like the writing
Yeah.
craft, I'm very very intrigued by Truman Capote because like it doesn't matter what you read, they're all like totally different but still amazing.
Yeah.
My second book, I use his other voices, other rooms as kind of like a creative like inspiration, like this ghostly imagery that kind of goes throughout the whole book. So yeah, I kind of have a fascination with Truman Capote.
Oh yeah, I mean, and one, he was just so talented, and I think it's when you're really into Capote and you start looking into like his whole career and stuff. It's pretty obvious that he's one of those guys where like alcohol and like amphetamine abuse clearly ruined his career. Like
Yeah, and
because he
his
was
filter. Yeah.
so good, yeah, and then kind of went too hard on the alcohol and the drugs, and then he
Yeah.
kind of lost
Yeah.
himself. But I did want to ask you about the controversial topics, right? Because I mean, so you took a risk here with this one. You wrote about a Jewish girl without being Jewish.
I did.
That's a big
I did.
no-no right now, and a lot of this kind of
I know.
we talk about on this podcast all the time. We kind of authenticity, lived experience, is big in the writing world right now. And I just wanted to ask, was it difficult for you to find a publisher because of that? Did you face any issues, any backlash?
Yeah.
How was that, taking that risk, and why did you want to take it?
So this is gonna sound very ignorant of me. This is my first novel. I did nothing in publishing. I didn't realize that I was stepping outside of a zone that maybe I should have stayed into. I'm not going to say I love the Holocaust because that sounds terrible. I am very inspired by the Holocaust stories. It is absolutely a Jewish tragedy.
Right.
But it's a human tragedy too.
Global, yeah.
Right? I mean, and it's the story needs to be told, and it needs to be told in a way or by people who are passionate about it. And I think that I'm very passionate about getting those stories out and being very respectful. So after I wrote it, then it kind of came like, as I'm talking to, and actually agents, publishers, it was fine. I didn't have any pushback at all.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
But more kind of like, wait, you're not Jewish?
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm so sorry. I hope I never led myself that way. Like, that's just how dumb I am. I didn't know. And so it was really important to me to have a sensitivity reader. So when I started working with the publisher, they were like, yeah, you can or cannot. I said, absolutely, I want to, because I don't want to have written from a Jewish point of view and then ignorantly, unintentionally portrayed something wrong. Right. So it was really important to me to have the sensitivity reader. So to make sure that I was very respectful and accurate in writing from a Jewish point of view. And that actually came back. It was all good. And then when I started working on promoting the book, I told my publicist, like straight up, like, I am not Jewish. I don't want anyone to think that I'm portraying myself as such, or I'm trying to sell books as such. Like, I don't want to be misled. Have you read Yellowface?
I haven't read it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Read that after I signed with Greenleaf for my publishing, to publish Diamonds in Auschwitz. And okay, what I did is not at all what happens in Yellowface, but it's the same idea of misrepresenting yourself to be a person of that culture to sell books about that culture. And so I was trying to be very, very ultra sensitive that was not coming off, because it was not done in any intentional way. But also, if I have to only write about things that I've experienced or things that have happened to people that live in Northern Indiana,
Right,
you'll never hear from me again, right? Stephen King is not a serial killer or a crazy psychotic clown, right? So we have to have some liberties to an extent to write.
Right, it's not fiction anymore if you're only
exactly
writing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, there are definitely lines in the sand of who should represent which people. I just hope that I did it in a very respectful, accurate, and sensitive way. Yeah. So I guess that's what I have to say.
Yeah. No, but I was just curious because I've heard so many stories. Yeah, I've heard so many kind of sometimes horror stories about if you did something like this. So I was just curious, and I know listeners are curious. because it seems like it is more of like a socially enforced thing than like the publisher enforcing it.
Yeah.
Like it's this weird kind of thing. And my thing with when people criticize books for I think it's too easy to criticize a book for something like that. But also I feel like you're not talking about the book anymore. You're talking about something else. You're not talking about fiction. You're not talking about this specific thing. You're talking about something so broad and so much bigger that it's, what can we do about that by publishing a novel? Almost nothing. Okay. Like we can't do anything through publishing novels for that. But yeah, I was just curious about that. You said you had to, you did this on your own, hiring a sensitivity reader. How was that? What was the experience like for?
It was, so I think that
I've heard mixed things on that too.
Yes,
I've heard horror stories, and I've heard that it's fine, and
I was expecting it to be 100% focused on Megan is not Jewish. All of her characters are. So that was what I was expecting the feedback to be. And it wasn't. Actually, the biggest thing that I got back from the sensitivity reader were 2 scenes in the book that the reader felt worried might be a little too graphic, and that people would put down the book and then never pick it up. And so she was like, I'm torn. I'm not telling you to take them out. I'm not telling you to completely change them. I'm telling you to think about it a little bit more. And one of them has an animal in it, a dog. I have found, so this is what I learned from sensitivity readers. You can get away with a lot of really terrible things, but do not hurt Fido.
Yeah.
Don't take it out on the dog. So she was like, I don't even, it's not a great situation for the dog. Well, the dog was actually representative of a character who we don't really like. What happens to him is off screen. And so the dog was supposed to represent like his fate. Well, I was already starting to think about changing his fate and maybe later doing like a spinoff novel that goes back to some unanswered characters. So when she was like, maybe don't kill the dog, I was like, that might work. Okay, no worries. So we changed it a little bit. So the dog, it's still not great, but we don't kill the dog. And then the second one was a scene which was, I knew it was bad, like rough, like it's really hard to read. And every time someone who has like my personal contact gets done reading the book, they come back and they all say the exact same scene. But I had done my research and I found multiple documented instances where the Nazis did this thing, and I'm not going to say what it is. If you read the book, you're with me, but I'm not going to say what it is because it's bad. And it's also a big spoiler, but they did it multiple times. I didn't make it up. Right. If I had made it up, maybe for stuff, it's disturbing. So that you should worry about me if I came up with that from my top of my head. So I talked to my husband, I talked to my number one reader, I talked to my editor, and I was really torn because I knew, and I was like, what's the point of having a sensitivity reader if you don't listen to them? And my husband finally was like, if we water down history, if we say, you know what, this thing that the Nazis did that we know they did is too hard to read, we shouldn't put it in a book. He's like 50 to 100 years from now, people are going to be like, why is everyone so hard on the Nazis? I don't really feel like what they did was so bad because we've changed it. And he said, I think you need to stick to your guns. And my editor immediately was like, don't change it. Let's rework like this one sentence. This softens it maybe just a tiny bit. But at the end of the day, what they did is what I wrote, and that's what people have to read, and they've got to learn to swallow it. And it is unpleasant. It's awful. So that was actually my experience with a sensitivity reader. So it was not bad at all. It really made me think a little bit more of like what was impactful. And it's don't use gruesome and brutality just for shock and awe factor, right? But like really be purposeful with it. And that is why I did not take those things out, because I had done my research and I just felt really strongly that it needed to be there. So it was a good experience. And especially when you're writing from a different point of view than what you really truly can understand and have lived yourself, I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious because I usually is always sex or violence that will flag something like that. It was like, oh, well, this is a little graphic, and it's like, yeah, well, I don't know. I'm torn on the sensitivity reader stuff because I'm always just curious. So I always like to hear authors' experience with it because I don't know. I feel like it does almost put authors on the defensive before the books even, before readers even had a chance to get their hands on it. It's you're kind of like trying to justify why, yeah, like, and then you spend like, what, even if it's just a few hours or 20 minutes or something, agonizing about this decision, and you're like, wait a minute, why am I agonizing about this? It's real. Like, there's a reason I put it in here.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting. Yeah, please.
I'm like the least confident writer, partly because I'm brand new, and also just like that's just partly my personality. So anytime my editors probably loved working with me. They're like, we think we should change that. Okay, if you think so.
Right. Yeah.
So actually, it was really nice to have my husband and my best friend and my editor kind of stand up for me and give me that confidence of like, no, I wrote this. And the more actually I talk about it with people, the more I'm so glad that we kept it in, because I did feel strongly about it, but I was afraid to feel strongly about it because you don't want to be a hassle. You don't want to be too difficult to work with. Wanted everybody to have a good experience working with me, so they want to work with me again. So editors from Greenleaf, though, were just so supportive, and they really just believed in the art of the book and supporting me in that way. So I have nothing bad to say about the publishing experience that I had.
Yeah, good. Because it's always things I hear, or people write an article or something. So I like to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, people that actually experienced it. Yeah. And then listeners get to hear it too. So I like that. Speaking of publishing industry, is that you had an interesting blog post about your time with a literary agent. What was your experience with hunting for and finding a literary agent? Our listeners love this sort of thing.
They're not going to love my story. It was so easy. I got so lucky in finding an agent. I knew the second that it happened so quickly and so easily. I knew like I was in for a very rough journey after that, because that part was too easy. So I can only tell you what I did. And my guess is this is never going to happen to me again. I took a day off work and I went through all of the marketing deals, like looking for historical fiction agents. I had already started making a list of agents from books that I liked, that I was like, I'm kind of like, Ariel Lawhorn and I are totally the same person. Like, her agent will love me,
Right.
Joking, of course. So writing down different agents. And so I had probably 75 different agents that I thought maybe could be a good fit. And so I spent a whole day really researching and ranking and perfecting my query and my cover letter and like all the stuff. And so I just was like, I'm just going to start sending. So on that very first day, I sent to my top 5 picks. That was a Friday. Sunday morning, one of my top 5 picks emailed me and was like, could you send me the whole manuscript? And so I'm trying to like cool down the emotions and be like, yeah, okay, that's probably just normal. And then, I start reading like that wasn't normal. By the next Friday, so I'm now 1 week into this, he called and asked to, work together. So it was way too easy, especially because he represented the estate of like one of my favorite authors. It was just so excited. And when we spoke, like he understood like what I was trying to do with the book and like really believed in it. And so it was amazing because, family and friends at that point, a couple people had read the book, and not to sound too snobby, but like there are readers and there are writers readers, know what I mean? Like, who understand, like you and I are having a really great conversation about like the craft of writing, which is way more esoteric than I can have with just regular readers. Yeah. So that was one of the first conversations I had with someone who understood the writing of what I was trying to do. And so we worked together for a year. I kind of at one point said, I think you're trying to get me to play varsity, but maybe I'm only ready for JV. So for a year we worked together. Nothing bad to say. It just didn't work out. I didn't get picked up by a big publisher, and he was not going for littler publishers. It just wasn't his game plan, and that's totally okay. So after the year, we amicably said, okay, contract's up. I didn't have anything else ready for him, so I'm going to keep going. Went to Greenleaf almost immediately and got picked up by then. So River Grove is their imprint. So that's who actually did the publishing. And then had just an amazing experience. So I queried very few agents, even less publishers. And it worked out this way for me. So
yeah,
I learned a lot. In that year. I think I didn't know what I should expect from an agent. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
there was a lot of unknowns, and I think now it would be a different experience because I think I know better questions to ask. I think I have better expectations of like what communication style should be, partly like what people are just going to do, like that's just
Right.
their style, and then maybe a little bit more like what I need. So I have a better understanding of what I'm looking for.
And honestly, I mean, what you're describing, I mean, it's a common tale. Like a lot of people, obviously, it's like, a 1% chance or something. You get that email or that call back for the full manuscript, and then you actually get like a year contract or an option or something. It's like, okay. And then it just doesn't work out. I mean, that's a very common tale. People think that once the agent says, okay, that's it. It's like, well, now you got to pitch, and that's going to take a year or two. And then it depends, the agent's style. I guess it makes sense why he wanted to go for big publishers because that's where the money is,
Yeah.
and for all his time and effort, you get his little, his cut or whatever. I mean, it makes sense he didn't want to waste his time with the smaller ones that
Yeah.
are not going to give him a big, because, if you're only getting 10 grand or something, well, his cut is like, like $500 or like $1,000. So it's not really worth the time. But if you get a $50,000 deal, it makes it a little bit more, and then $100,000, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. I mean, it's just, I like that you have that. And then and this is on her blog too, listeners. You can go there. It's linked below as well. But yeah, I found that very interesting that you shared that with your journey. And then there was also another great piece on your blog about finding inspiration for stories from the places you visit. And I wanted to just have you go into that a little bit. How do you do that? And what do you mean by that? Finding inspiration from these locations.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I had said with just wanting to learn more about the stories. There's just so many amazing things. And when you are in a location, you learn so much more about it. And in full disclosure, I've never been to Prague, which is that's a tough thing for me. I feel a little bit like a fraud in writing in so much detail. It was a lot of research to be able to write about that city. But when you're there, one of the things I really like to do when I'm traveling is I used to run long distance more than I do now, but I love going out like early in the morning of someplace and just go for a run. And I feel like I experienced Seattle that way. And my daughter and I did it when we were in Rome, which was so cool to like run through Rome and go to some of the landmarks that we hadn't seen yet because we just hadn't had time. And to be there early in the morning when it's only like the street crews cleaning up. And I just think you just experience so much more, and you're getting the more of these minute details that really make up this beautiful, grand view of a city or a place or a culture. So getting out there and just asking questions and trying to find like, what's the story that hasn't been told, which kind of leads into my second book. I just finished the first draft. No agent, no publisher yet. I haven't even started querying on it. But it's based off of an old haunted legend in Charleston. So my family and I, we did a night tour in Charleston. So if you're there, of course, that's like the thing to do, right? And there was one legend of the Haints or the Boo-Hag, whichever word you want to talk about, that terrified my daughter. I mean, I had to sleep with her the next 2 nights because she was so scared of a Boo-Hag, like riding around on her shoulders. And I was intrigued by the story of this ghost that haunts St. Michael's Church. And the story is that if you get married in the church and the groom is unworthy, the ghost will stop the wedding. And this ghost has been there since like the 1800s. And I just, and of course they told just the tiny little bit of like the true story of the person who had died. And I had so many questions. There was, feminism is rolling around in my head, and after the Revolutionary War, and I'm a big Hamilton fan, obviously. And so talking about the Revolutionary War, and then of course slavery. I mean, Charleston has such a history of slavery,
Right.
and
It's a huge port there. Yeah.
oh my goodness, yeah, and just awful ways of treatment of slaves. And so there was just so many things. And then the story of the Boo-Hag that just kept my daughter up at night. And to one point, she even drew a picture of it because she's trying to get that image out of her head.
Right.
And so I just rolled all these different ideas around in my mind for honestly a few years. It's been a while since we've been to Charleston. And it wasn't until I finally was like, okay, I'm going to write this, but I'm not really sure how. And I was having problems with some character motivation. And then, going back to the classics, like who understands characters better than anybody is Shakespeare. So I decided the bones of the story is actually a retelling of Shakespeare tragedy. And then I started just piling on all these Charleston legends and Revolutionary War. And really the idea is like the different ways that we can be trapped, whether by like social norms, if you're like a woman in the 1800s, obviously like slavery, right? If you are a Black person living in Charleston in the 1800s, but also like mental health issues or PTSD of somebody who's lived through the Revolutionary War and fought in like the lowlands and the swamps of South Carolina, and how that would trap you, even though you're experiencing this like much better way of life, right? The war's over. So a lot of different things kind of played into inspiration. So The Place, I told you, the Truman Capote book I had read, Shakespeare. I really love Kate Morton, who does a great job of historical fiction, maybe not so much on the side of like what Diamonds and Auschwitz is historical fiction, but definitely set in these rich historical time periods, but with like a little bit of a mystery. And then I was playing a lot of Benson Boone. There's a lot of Benson Boone inspiration in this book. And so kind of putting, art and music and other people's writings and totally unrelated stories, but I just like the style of them. And so that's what I tried to mix together. I'm not sure that it's all quite coming together like I would hope, right? You put in all these ingredients in the stew and you hope it still tastes good. We'll see.
Yeah, that's what editing's for. You'll find
exactly.
it. Yeah. But
I get it out. It goes to my developmental editor next week, so we'll see what she thinks.
Yeah. And I want to get to that too. Yeah, the last couple of questions are all usually craft for your specific process and all that too. It's always fun. But that, and I think I liked, the reason I brought this up is because when I saw the blog post and I was reading it and I was like, okay, I agree with this, where I think that I'm a big vibes person. And I know that's not the best word to describe some of this, but the energy you get when you step off the plane or the train or whatever, and you're in this new city or this new place, whether that's vacation or you're just passing through or whatever it is, you immediately are hit with the energy of it. What that is it laid back, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, I find it harder to write about a place when I'm currently living in it. Like for some reason, when I was living in Lake Charles, I never wrote about Lake Charles or like the southern Louisiana or anything like that. But then as soon as I moved away, I was just obsessed with this idea of writing about that space and that culture and that place. And even so, that I live in Vegas now, I've tried to write some stuff based in Vegas. It's always more difficult for me. I wonder if I have to move away in order to go back to it.
It's like you need that distance, right?
Yeah. It is. It's just, you pick up on these things. I don't know. I mean, I think that's great to kind of, you see this one little thing and then that romanticism, you pull a thread out of that. But yeah, I love that. Okay, yeah. So the last couple of questions here are all writing based questions and craft styles. So we like to ask all writers that come on here, what is your routine like? What is your writing routine like? What do you like to do?
Yeah, I'm very regimented. I think this must be like the banking finance side of me. Like a true creative probably is like, I'm way too disciplined, but also I have a full-time job. Right. I have, as everybody has so many things that they're trying to juggle. So my time in front of the computer working on my stories is very limited. So it has to be really focused. Right. So I do outline. I've got a pretty good outline. I've got a notebook where I jot down different ideas. I'm not committed to writing it perfectly in order. Like if a different scene hits me, and even if it wasn't in the outline, I'm going to write it, and then I'll work it in, or maybe not later. So I don't have any problems writing out of order. But I also end today knowing what I'm going to write tomorrow. Even if I'm not really sure what's going to go beyond that, I might even cut myself off a little bit early. Like I might have the juices flowing, but I need to be motivated to get back to the computer the next day. Like I need to know what I'm going to write, because if I don't know what I'm going to write, I won't go back. I don't go back, right? I don't know who wants to just sit there, and I don't have time to just sit there in front of a blank screen. So I always make sure that I know what tomorrow's project, what the scene is going to look like, what the idea, like what I'm trying to get across. And I think I didn't quite figure that out until like really late in the game of Diamonds and Auschwitz, of like, that's what you have to do to stay motivated. So I have like a very specific word count, like every week, like I'm really trying to hit this word count again. Like I'm a little crazy with my schedule, but that's also too, because it's like, I have so much in me that I want to write. And if I just dawdle with this one book for the next 2 or 3 years, like something's not going to get written. That's how I feel about books that I want to read too, right? Like I'm not messing around with a book that doesn't catch me in the first quarter. Like I'm moving on and we got to go to another. I got too many books to read.
That's Hemingway says something similar with that. He has like a famous quote where he said, yeah, you want to leave a little bit in the tank at the end of a session so that you're not on empty when you start the next day, you know?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get drained and then your energy's just zapped for the next day. Yeah. Because I think people that don't write or people that don't do anything creative, they're a little naive about how much energy it takes. Like how kind of after a writing session or something, especially if, if you do like an hour or two, I'm always envious of people that can do it for 3 hours straight or more. You're exhausted. It's borderline athletic. You feel fatigued after it. I mean, mentally drained. You don't have a lot of space. It takes a lot of energy to keep that up. And I think that's why you see kind of artists and writers and, everybody, directors, by like once they hit 60, 65, they're probably not going to be creating their masterpieces just because you're so tired. Like, and it takes so much energy. You might not just have it anymore. Like it just, it may be the benefit of youth and stuff that happens with that. But so you said you do outlines. You do elaborate, like 100-page outlines?
No. Like my outline for the book in Charleston was like 4 pages. So it's pretty basic. The notebook, I like, and I like the paper notebook. I like to be able to flip through the pages. That's where, like, if I know I want a scene, that's where I start jotting down like maybe inspirations for that scene, or like, I might just have like 4 lines of dialogue that I know I want to fit in there. And so that's when I write things down, and that's my brainstorming, and, it's a mess, and I cross things out and I highlight and I circle. And so that's the pages that I'll have open. But no, it's more like a basic idea of like, these are the different things, like plot points that I really want to hit.
And when you do that, do you have like a brainstorming session, or is it just stuff as it strikes you, you write it down in the notebook and then you kind of piece it together as the process? Like that.
Exactly. Yeah. When I was working on the Charleston one, I was trying to fill in like other Charleston legends, kind of like an Easter egg hunt, right? Like, there's another ghost. And if you know anything about Charleston lore, you might hopefully be able to recognize them. I literally started writing things on Post-it notes, and I just had spread out on my wall and was like moving them around. Like, I know what these characters are going to do, but I also want to work in these, and I want to have like the boo hag and so I just had like all of my main like kind of action points on, and I just spread them out and moved them around.
That's interesting too. Yeah. Cause we like to get into these details on this podcast. Cause you have some writers that are like, they can't write a word without doing like, a 200-page outline, almost as long as the novel, right? Every little detail, every beat planned out, thought about like for a long time. And not to say that it couldn't change. I know most people that outline are open to changes because you have to in the creative process. But it's just curious because everybody has their own style. Yeah, like we've had writers on that just don't do any outlines. I have experimented, like I've gone back and forth. I think the outlines are very helpful, but then sometimes it's more fun to just fly by the seat of your pants or do a combination, like it's so we're always curious. Everybody has their own kind of techniques, and it's funny how it's like based around your life, right? So you have kids, you have your job, you have this relationship, family, marriage, all this stuff that comes in, and you just have to kind of piece it together somehow. And I just love hearing, like, it's almost like a process of discovery, right? Like you're finding these things as they bounce around, and that's another theme on the podcast. We like to hear about that. So, and you said handwrite. So you like to do notebook first? Do you type, or do you do handwrite combination? What do you
handwrite? Like, I basically
full prose handwriting, like first draft or something, or
and that it's just more like notes, like things I want to include. So I start researching, right? Like and so there's things in the history, or like there's scenes or settings that I want to make sure I hit, so everything gets like a page. Remember in Diamonds in Auschwitz, I just had pages for all the different chapter ideas, but all the different parts of history. And then as I did more research, I'd flip back and add to it. And then that really helped in my mind craft that story. When I sat down to write Diamonds in Auschwitz, I had no idea about the art class in Terezin. I had no idea about the Red Cross visit, which actually ends up being kind of the catalyst that ships Han and Samuel out of the ghetto, and all these things were historical. I just added them. I just thought, well, that's really cool. That's really cool. All right, am I going to work it in? How can I work it in?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Neil Gaiman has that great quote where he says, the first draft is just you telling yourself the story.
Yeah.
And all these things are missing from it. And then when you go to do that first rewrite, second rewrite, third rewrite, like it just kind of you start to see all the missing pieces, and you start to move things that, you can start to tell the story for an audience as opposed to just yourself, where it's about, I'm a big believer in, just getting it out, get that first draft done.
100% agree.
Maybe even set it aside for a little bit and then come back, start rewriting. I'm like, even if you have to rewrite word for word, just start retyping, you will just see all of this stuff flesh out, fill in all these things that were in your head that didn't make it on the paper in the first draft, come out in the second, the third, the fourth, it just, and then then you send to the editor and you have that process that helps. But we love those types of details on this podcast. Another one, and again, we don't need numbers or anything like this, but we ask all writers that come on this, how do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature? And again, we don't need numbers, but we ask this because it's tough out there for writers. It's tough. It's tough to make a living as a writer. So we do this one to kind of dispel the illusion that all these writers are millionaires. But also just because I think it helps listeners where they're that are struggling to be like, everybody's doing the same thing. It doesn't matter. We've had people that have won, MBA awards and they can't make a living writing. Okay. Like they're teaching or they're doing something else with a, so how do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature?
Not yet. So, when I started working with Greenleaf, so they're actually a hybrid publisher. So there's definitely some investment on my end. Right. They were so great about just setting real expectation. They're like, what's the real expectation for this book? And, I know enough about the publishing journey that if you're going with a hybrid publisher, you're not going on a New York Times bestseller. Like it's just, that's not happening with this book. And I said, I want this book to do well enough that a bigger publisher will look at me for book 2. That is my goal. My goal is not to make money on this book. I really doubt it. Even like a respectable debut author, I mean, we're not talking hundreds of thousands of copies, maybe thousands, maybe,
maybe 1,000. I think, what was it? During that lawsuit for the when Simon & Schuster was trying to buy Penguin Random House, that got shut down. There was all these numbers that came out, and I said I think that the average debut author that's on a Penguin Random House, so a huge Big 5 publishing contract, I think they said the average sells 250 copies.
Yeah.
I gave barely 1,000.
I gave myself a goal, if I could do 1,500 copies, basically in the first year,
you're ahead of the game.
I'm going to feel like that is a respectable number. So so you read some of my blogs. I think I'm very vulnerable and very upfront of not knowing what I'm doing and just kind of the emotional, social, the anxieties, all this stuff of being a writer and trying to make this work. I had in my head when I was working with an agent that if I couldn't make it work with this agent, that was it. That was my one chance in this industry. What's worse than not getting an agent and losing an agent? Well, I'm learning so much. There's not one way to do things, and there's not anything that you can do that's just going to cut you out forever. Right. And I think that's what I had in my head. I have to make this work or nothing is ever going to work. So my thought is just make the number somewhat respectable enough to earn a little bit of okay, she doesn't completely not have any followers, right? So my goal has been 1,200 to 1,500. I will not make any money if all I sell is 1,500 books, but that's okay. I think that's enough to hopefully get someone's attention for the next one. I will say I'm more than a third of the way there, and the book's been out for not quite 2 months. So it's going well. I haven't gotten a single check yet.
Right. Yeah.
Royalties won't pay out till June or July. But that's okay. That wasn't the purpose. It is more outlay, even if you have a traditional publishing deal, than I had realized, because, you could write the best book, but if nobody knows it's out there, there's nothing that you can do. And so it costs to have a publicist, though it's totally worth it. I loved working with PR by the Book. They're wonderful. It costs to enter into contests. You need contests to give yourself a little bit more credibility. So, I've done that, racked up a couple contest awards. So that's great, but $50, $75 a pop, right?
Right.
So all these things cost money. So no matter what kind of deal you have, like it's going to be some sort of outlay. So you have to really just look at the long-term goal, right? I think my husband and I were like, maybe the third book will make us some money. That's the goal at this point. First book, nope, that's a loss. Second book, maybe it'll help make up the loss from the first book. Third book, maybe then we'll start making some money. And that might even still be pretty ambitious and very optimistic on our part.
Right.
So,
And even then it's like, yeah, because we had a few on there that did make some money, but like we had, I think it was one guest said, I've made maybe like, he's like, enough to buy a car. He's like, maybe a used car, like
right?
20,000 over like 4 years. Like, so
Yeah,
it's not enough to live off of, but I did make some,
Yeah.
So you need to have a day job. You have a day job. Yeah.
I do. I have a very busy day job.
Right.
I have a day job that treats me well. There's a lot of flexibility, obviously, they'll let me do these podcast interviews and,
Right.
but a lot, all the writing is done after the work day. And there are definitely days where the day job has so drained me.
Right.
We talk about it's draining to do creative, but I don't even have the energy to start it. And I just had to really be, and again, I've learned this probably just in the last year. So I just had to be kinder to myself and say, this is not a day, going into this entire week, like this is not a day you're going to be able to write.
Right.
And you just have to be okay with that and move on. Cause I'm just such a disciplined person. I just have set really high goals for myself. So on the days when I know that work is going to take every bit of me, or my daughter's going to have us out late because she has, some sort of event or whatever.
Right.
I just have to give myself a pass on those days and really just try and focus on the days when I do have the energy and I do have the time to sit in front of the computer and work on my stories.
Yeah, I usually ask this. I forgot to. Are you usually a daily, if you can, writer or?
Yeah, I prefer to. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. I would say 4 or 5 times a week for sure.
Yeah,
I usually give myself about a 5,000 words a week. That's my goal on most of the time. But I have to be nice sometimes and say that this is not a week that you're going to hit that.
Yeah. Life happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the questions we ask all the writers that come on here, because I think it is, like you've already mentioned a few things that inspire this. I think you like to ask, are you reading anything good, watching anything good, listening to anything good? I mean, because I feel like whatever you fill your head with, right, whether it's books, movies, TV shows, or if you're just scrolling the timeline, right, social media endlessly, that's what fills your head, and that's what comes out, kind of, even if we don't want it to. So I don't know, reading anything good, watching anything good, listening to anything good that you recommend?
I just finished Prince of the Tides by Pat Conroy, so kind of old. I mean, I guess he hasn't been gone that long, but is that a classic?
Yeah.
It feels like a classic. It was so good. We talked about like familiar relationships with brothers and sisters and parents and living, and it was set in South Carolina. So I'm just finishing the first draft of my book in South Carolina, obviously very different time periods, but the setting, it was just very immersive. And so there were parts of my book where I'm like, ooh, I did not get that right. I'm going to defer to Pat Conroy, like he knows. So maybe I need to kind of adjust some of my setting descriptions. So Prince of the Tides was really, really good. It's big, right? Like, was it 650 pages? Like it's tome, but totally worth it. And it reads beautifully. Like I'm an annotator. I love to write in my books. I do all those things that some people, like the purists hate. I dog ear my favorite passages. So someday someone's going to pick up a book and the page is going to be dog-eared. And I love the idea of them trying to figure out, like, why did she dog-ear it? Is it this paragraph? Is it this sentence? Whatever. I swear, like, every other page was dog-eared in this book. My copy of this book is going to be a wreck. So that was just really beautiful. Very, again, great complex characters, a lot of drama. I mean, he's writing about how traumatic his childhood is, but half the time I'm like, I want this childhood. Like, they did adventures and these siblings are so close. And then, there's some really terrible things. Of course, I did not want that childhood. But it's amazing how he can just write both where you're totally envious of these kids growing up, barefoot on the beaches of South Carolina. And then also like some of the most horrific things I've ever read happening to people. So that was that. I'm like so overwhelmed by that book right now. And that's been a few books ago, but it's still really heavy on my mind.
Yeah.
So that's great. I told you I've been listening to a lot of Benson Boone. He has some very soulful, like just very, like, I love beautiful things. and people are like, oh, it's such a wonderful love story. I'm like, it is, but kind of not. Like that character or that singer or whatever, that point of view is like definitely has some issues, right?
Yeah.
Like he's kind of screaming for a reason because there's just so much emotion and desperation to like be loved and keep these people with them. And so that's been a big inspiration for the book that I just finished the first draft on. So yeah, those are kind of, and I always listen to Queen. I'm a huge Queen fan. Right? Freddie Mercury.
Do you put on music while you write or edit?
No. I have music on all other times in my life, but I need quiet when I'm writing because otherwise I'll be singing.
Right.
Though I do have like I call it my Beautiful Things chapter in this Bride of St. Michael's that I've been working on, just because that song is like the theme song for one of my characters. It really helps me with his motivation. And so I did listen. So I was kind of listening to this song when I'm writing the chapter, and then I was getting distracted because I was like screaming the verses, right? And so I turned it off, and like the craziest thing happened. It was like windows were open, and we live on a small cul-de-sac road by a lake, and somebody was driving down a road. This has never happened. Someone drives down a road, and he was on a motorcycle, and I am not joking, blaring Beautiful Things. I am writing my Beautiful Things chapter, and this motorcycle is coming around my house, and I can hear the song playing from their like grainy radio station. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have struck the right note though. Like that to me was like, you know, the heavens were shining down a spotlight of sun on me, and like, you're doing the right thing. The
synchronicities. Yeah.
Yeah. That was
absolutely
crazy.
A sign. Yeah. When people come like, oh, give me a sign. It's like, well, it's right here. There it is, the synchronicity.
It's the motorcycler playing their music way too loud.
I always think of that Mel Gibson kind of monologue in Signs, right? Well, it depends what type of person are you. Are you the type of person that believes that there are no coincidences? You know, like like are you that type of person? Because that makes your life a little different. And the final question we like to ask is, what are you working on now? You said it's that new novel. If you feel free to share it. I know we have some people that we've had writers on that are superstitious and don't want to share anything, but about the brides in Charleston.
Yeah. So tentative title will say it's the Bride of St. Michael's. So yeah, it takes place. It's kind of like the origin story of this ghost and how the ghost comes to be and who is the person that killed the person, right? So it's not really meant to be a mystery, though. Hopefully there's a little bit of a whodunit to it. But I really like the idea of the different ways that the characters are trapped. It's all told from the point of view of this young girl. Her name is Harriet Mackey is her real name. I call her Eddie because I think Harriet's kind of a terrible name. So her nickname is Eddie. And yeah, it follows Eddie. She just moved to Charleston. She turned 18, and her family, her parents died when she was younger and left her as the sole inheritor of her plantation and their, all of their assets. But she believes that she has to marry specifically one of these two brothers that live in a neighboring plantation to come into her inheritance. And she starts to kind of question, do I really have to marry one of them? Do I really have to marry at all? Do I want to marry? And so that's kind of what starts the story.
Fantastic.
And then someone's going to die. Yeah. There's a ghost. So yeah.
I said, I love the ghost stuff too. Yeah. All right. Meg, this has been fantastic. Where can people find your stuff? Website, social media, all of that.
Yeah. So my website is meghamandauthor.com. And so it's MEG. Hamand is spelled HAMAND author.com. And that's got links to Diamonds in Auschwitz. If you wanted to buy a copy, of course, it's on Amazon or any other bookstore website, physical bookstore that you like to go into. Also has a couple details of my next upcoming book, has a link to my blog, and great pictures of all the events that I've been doing. And you can also subscribe so you can get an email with upcoming events. And I'm active on Facebook and social media as Meg Hamand.
Fantastic. And that's all linked below as well, listeners, so go check that out, as well as Meg's book. Meg, please come back. This has been fantastic. Please
this has been great. Yeah.
Yeah. Please come back for the next one.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.